We often wonder how the British monarchy might have looked today if Charles and Camilla had simply been allowed to marry in the 1970s. But history followed a much longer, more difficult path. While Queen Elizabeth II was a master of keeping her true thoughts concealed, she possessed a remarkably precise language of her own, the royal jewelry collection. I want to look back at how this shift actually happened, tracing a journey from a tiny gold brooch worn by mistake to the massive historical diadems of the highest rank. Today, we're going to decode that visual language and see how the Queen used her mother's jewels to quietly pave a way toward a future that once seemed impossible. When people look back at the story of King Charles III and Queen Camilla, they frequently focus on the very beginning in the early 1970s. We all know the famous anecdote about Camilla breaking the ice by mentioning her great-grandmother, Alice Capel, the long-term mistress of King Edward VII. While this makes for a compelling opening chapter, the actual explanation of how Camilla entered the royal family lies decades later. Both of them went on to marry other people, and after those marriages eventually collapsed, the situation grew increasingly complicated. By the late 1990s, following the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, the public hostility toward Camilla remained intense and sustained. This resistance echoed well beyond newspaper headlines. Royal biographers consistently describe a period of deep internal discomfort within the institution itself, with Queen Elizabeth II reportedly refusing to have Camilla's name uttered in her presence at one point. Camilla stayed firmly outside the visible structure of the royal family, unacknowledged and entirely separate from its public life. Eventually, carefully managed attempts were made to shift that perception. In January 1999, Charles and Camilla appeared together outside the Ritz Hotel in London after a 50th birthday party for Camilla's sister. The entire appearance lasted a mere 15 seconds, just enough time to walk down the steps to a waiting car and produce the first widely circulated images of them together. Visibility, however, differs entirely from institutional acceptance. The genuine turning point happened away from the flashbulbs 3 years later, in April 2002, following the death of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Up to that moment, Camilla had largely watched royal family events from the sidelines, with strict boundaries kept firmly intact. The Queen Mother's funeral introduced a subtle, highly significant change. Camilla was allowed to be present at one of the most sensitive and symbolically important family gatherings, standing within the structure itself rather than remaining at the margins. The palace issued no announcements or explanations, leaving the visual presence to speak for itself. From that point onward, the conversation shifted toward how she would eventually be integrated into the fold. Once that boundary shifted, the most precise signals of her new position arrived without a single formal statement. They arrived through the specific historical jewels she was given to wear. By 2005, the long wait was finally over. The transition between that pivotal moment in 2002 and the wedding in 2005 was marked by a steady, quiet inclusion. While the Queen, as head of the Church of England, did not attend the civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall, her presence at the service of prayer and blessing at St. George's Chapel was a powerful statement in itself. It was a public acknowledgement that the path was now officially clear. When Charles and Camilla married in Windsor, the Queen herself gave a remarkably warm toast at the reception. She told the assembled guests, "I'm very proud and wish them well. My son is home and dry, with the woman he loves." The words offered an undeniable public blessing. Long before that toast echoed through Windsor Castle, the first true sign of Camilla's new place in the family had already appeared on her left hand. Charles had proposed with a striking 5-carat emerald-cut diamond, flanked by diamond baguettes that had originally been given to the Queen Mother back in 1929. The diamonds are widely believed to have been given to him from his grandmother, meaning he could offer it without needing to ask the sovereign to open the official vaults. The choice of this specific heirloom over a newly purchased stone set a very distinct direction for Camilla's royal life. That engagement ring was actually just the first piece from the Queen Mother's collection to appear on Camilla. As time went on, it became clear that Queen Elizabeth II consistently preferred to loan her daughter-in-law the jewelry that had belonged to her own mother rather than drawing from her own active collection. There is a very practical reason for this choice. Queen Elizabeth II had her own signature brooches, necklaces, and tiaras, which were deeply tied to her daily routine as the monarch. Handing those active pieces over to Camilla would have risked blurring the reigning queen's carefully established image. The palace avoids that kind of overlap at all costs. The Queen Mother's collection provided the perfect answer. She had amassed an astonishing array of gems throughout her long life, and her pieces were grand, expressive, and wonderfully theatrical. Historically, they were associated with the exact position Camilla was stepping into, a senior royal lady and the wife of a future king. The sheer scale of the Queen Mother's jewels suited Camilla beautifully, sitting much better on her than the stricter pieces favored by Elizabeth II herself. Relying on this specific collection allowed the royal family to walk a very safe line. Camilla was clearly placed within the highest tier of the hierarchy, wearing the grand jewels of the previous queen consort, while leaving the current monarch's territory completely untouched. The transfer of these specific pieces quietly outlined Camilla's future long before any formal titles were ever sorted out. When Camilla began her public life, as a member of the royal family, the first jewelry choices she made served as a gentle introduction to her new position. These early pieces were lighter than the grand tiaras that would follow, but they were deeply rooted in the Queen Mother's personal history. One of the first brooches to appear was a piece called the Pearl of the D, which Camilla wore for her official engagement portrait at Birkhall and then during her Scottish honeymoon in 2005. It has a very specific, modern origin. The English goldsmith Rachel Jeffrey designed it for the Salmon and Trout Association, who presented it to the Queen Mother for her 100th birthday in the year 2000. It is shaped like a hand-tied salmon fly, a direct tribute to the Queen Mother's decades of fly fishing on the River Dee in Aberdeenshire. The detail on such a small object is quite remarkable. It is crafted from solid 18-karat gold, with a blue-gray pearl forming the head of the fly. The body consists of a lattice set with tiny sapphires, emeralds, and rubies, colors chosen to represent the Queen Mother's racing silks, while yellow and white diamonds form the wings. The Queen Mother was never photographed wearing this birthday gift in public, though palace equerries sent a letter saying she was delighted with it. But here is the catch, and it is a detail that I think is very revealing. In those first 2005 appearances, Camilla pinned the brooch to her jacket completely upside down. The goldsmith eventually had to contact the press to explain that what might have been mistaken for feathers sprouting from a crown was actually the tail of the fly. This small oversight matters because it reminds us that, at the time, Camilla was still very much an outsider navigating a world of rigid symbolic codes. She corrected the error by her next major outing at the Bremer Gathering in 2006, pinning the fly right side up, showing a quiet adjustment to the expectations of her role. When Camilla began appearing in more significant pieces associated with Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, the choices followed a very careful logic. Take the diamond thistle brooch, for example. Its exact origins remain uncertain. Some historians tentatively link it to the Greville bequest, largely because it entered the Queen Mother's rotation in the early 1940s, shortly after Mrs. Greville's death. But what matters more is how it was used. The Queen Mother wore it during the war years, often pinned prominently to her hats, and later during Scottish engagements. For decades, it simply disappeared from public view. When Camilla brought it back, first during an overseas visit and later at major Scottish events, this revival of a forgotten jewel allowed her to step into a very specific visual role. The thistle is Scotland's national emblem. Wearing it places the wearer within a long-established royal pattern tied to territory, duty, and representation. I find this shift particularly interesting. Camilla moved away from purely neutral, safe pieces and began wearing jewels that carried regional symbolism. It suggests she was being trusted to actively represent the crown. A different kind of signal appears in the carved rock crystal brooch. Unlike the thistle, this feels like a more personal piece. It is an Art Deco design, likely by Cartier, featuring translucent crystal carved with delicate scroll design. Because the crystal is translucent, it actually absorbs the color of the fabric beneath it, which makes it an incredibly practical choice for a working royal wardrobe. We can trace its history back to April 1927, when the young Duchess of York wore it pinned to a cloche hat during her royal tour of Australia. It then sat in the vaults for nearly 80 years, until it reappeared on the Duchess of Cornwall shortly after her wedding. By allowing Camilla to wear such a recognizable, personal piece, Queen Elizabeth II was making a quieter kind of choice. This feels less like a grand diplomatic statement and more like a personal gesture, either a sign that Camilla was being trusted with the more private, sentimental layers of the Queen Mother's collection, or simply a decision to bring a beautiful, long-dormant jewel back into the light. While brooches serve as the daily uniform for daytime royal duties, the true marker of a senior royal lady's position emerges after dark. State banquets require tiaras. When Queen Elizabeth II opened the vaults for her new daughter-in-law, she selected 3 specific, massive tiaras for long-term loan. These choices clearly signaled the role being prepared for Camilla, bypassing delicate starter pieces in favor of historical heavyweights. The first of these made its debut just months after the 2005 wedding. In October, during a state banquet for the Norwegian royal family, Camilla stepped out wearing the Delhi Durbar tiara. Sheer scale of this piece is remarkable. Greville created it in 1911 for Queen Mary to wear at the Delhi Durbar, the massive celebration marking the coronation of King George V and Queen Mary as Emperor and Empress of India. King George V wore the newly made imperial crown of India for the occasion, and Queen Mary needed a completely new diadem to match its grandeur. King George personally paid the bill for his wife's 44th birthday present, simply calling it May's Best Tiara. To construct it, Greville dismantled Queen Mary's Boucheron loop tiara, reusing 675 diamonds that had originally been a gift from the directors of the De Beers mine in South Africa. The resulting platinum and gold diadem forms a complete circlet of diamond lyres and S-scrolls, overlapped by heavy diamond festoons, wrapping entirely around the head. It originally featured pear-shaped emeralds from the Cambridge collection on top, which Mary later removed to use in the Vladimir tiara. She also had the frame adapted in 1912 to temporarily hold the massive Cullinan III and IV diamonds. Queen Mary eventually loaned the tiara to her daughter-in-law, the Queen Mother, for the 1947 royal tour of South Africa. It remained in the Queen Mother's possession until her death in 2002. Despite making such a grand opening statement with the Delhi Durbar at that 2005 banquet, Camilla has never worn it in public again. The reason is rooted in physical reality. Royal jewelry expert Hugh Roberts points out that the Delhi Durbar is exceptionally heavy and cumbersome. Camilla soon turned to another diadem from the Queen Mother's collection, one that offered immense volume without the crushing weight. This alternative became the Greville tiara. Lucien Hertz, the chief designer of Boucheron in Paris, created it in 1921 for the Honorable Mrs. Margaret Greville, using diamonds from her older palmette tiara. Mrs. Greville was a prominent society hostess and the illegitimate daughter of a brewery millionaire. She asked Boucheron to create a modern, geometric honeycomb and lozenge pattern set in platinum. When Mrs. Greville died in 1942, she left her vast jewelry collection to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen. Because of the ongoing war and the propriety of accepting such a massive private bequest, the Queen Mother waited until the 1947 South African tour to wear the Boucheron honeycomb tiara publicly. By 1953, she had Cartier alter it, increasing the height by rearranging the top clusters into triangles and adding a large marquise-cut diamond along with stones from a dismantled brooch. It became her absolute favorite, worn constantly for the next 5 decades. Camilla adopted the modified Greville tiara with the exact same enthusiasm. She has worn it for nearly every major diplomatic reception and state banquet, frequently pairing it with white evening gowns and her signature pearl chokers. The clever honeycomb construction makes it surprisingly lightweight, allowing her to comfortably wear a substantial wall of diamonds. Watching how these treasures were distributed offers a fascinating look at the internal logic of the monarchy. It reveals that different roles within the family require an entirely different visual language. If you look at the pieces entrusted to Catherine during her first years as the Duchess of Cambridge, you see a specific pattern. She was given tiaras like the Lover's Knot and the Lotus Flower, beautiful openwork designs that are lyrical and balanced. They perfectly suited her position at that time. The choices for Camilla, however, followed a different trajectory. As the wife of the direct heir, she was given what I'd call architectural jewelry. Tiaras like the Delhi Durbar and the Greville honeycomb are monumental, high walls of diamonds. They require a certain maturity and presence to carry off, as pieces of this scale can easily overwhelm the wearer if the timing isn't right. It wasn't a matter of personal preference, it was a practical decision by the system. From the very beginning, Camilla was being visually prepared for her future role as queen consort, provided with the specific jewelry, tools, required for that level of state representation. While the Delhi Durbar and the Greville are well known, there is a third tiara included in that long-term loan from Queen Elizabeth II. It remains entirely hidden from public view. This is the Tech Crescent Tiara. Its story begins in the mid-19th century with Princess Mary, Duchess of Gloucester, a daughter of King George III. When she died in 1857, she left a diamond bandeau and 3 diamond roses to her niece, Princess Mary Adelaide, Duchess of Teck. Mary Adelaide combined these elements into a new frame, creating a row of 20 diamond crescents hugging the 3 central roses. The crescents are quite versatile and can actually be worn facing either forward or backward. The Duchess of Teck wore it frequently, and it features prominently in the foreground of Lauritz Tuxen's painting of the 1893 royal wedding of her daughter, the future Queen Mary. The tiara passed to her eldest son, Prince Adolphus. During World War I, Adolphus renounced his German Teck titles as a patriotic gesture and was created the Marquess of Cambridge. His wife, Margaret, wore the crescent tiara to the 1911 coronation of King George V and Queen Mary. By the 1930s, the piece had quietly moved into Queen Mary's collection, and she quickly passed it to her daughter-in-law, the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother barely wore it, taking it out mainly for a 1939 royal tour of Canada before retiring it to the vaults. It was only seen again in 2001 for a tiara exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Camilla has held this historic piece in her collection since 2005. We are still waiting to see if she will ever choose to bring those antique diamond crescents back into the light. It is a reminder that even when the Queen opened the vaults, some signals remained reserved for a future we haven't yet seen. In the years following the wedding, the visual evidence of this shift moved beyond the vaults. We began to see Camilla more and more frequently at the Queen's side during the most significant events of the royal calendar. Whether they were sharing a carriage during the Diamond Jubilee in 2012 or standing together at the state opening of Parliament, these appearances made it increasingly clear that Camilla had been woven into the working structure of the monarchy. She was no longer on the margins. She had become a senior member of the royal family. When a royal event requires the architectural weight of a diadem like the Greville tiara, the jewelry choice becomes a balancing act. One cannot simply pair such a monumental piece with a delicate chain. The necklace must carry enough presence to ground the visual scale. This is likely why Queen Elizabeth II didn't just lend the tiara, she provided the matching weight for the neck. We saw this clearly during a banquet in Uganda in 2007, when Camilla, then the Duchess of Cornwall, appeared in what looked like a solid diamond bib. It matched the gravity of her tiara flawlessly because it was designed for that exact purpose. It's easy to be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of stones, but there is a very practical side to this Cartier piece. Mrs. Greville commissioned the necklace in 2 stages, first a 2-row festoon in 1929, then a 3-row piece in 1938, specifically so the smaller one would sit perfectly inside the larger one. This matters because it gives the wearer options. The Queen Mother wore the full 5 strands for decades, only switching to the smaller 3-strand version in her later years, as her preference shifted toward a slightly lighter look. By giving Camilla the entire set, the Queen was granting her that same flexibility. We have seen Camilla follow this exact pattern, wearing the imposing 5 strands for the Waterloo Bicentenary banquet, and recently opting for the 3-strand variation for a state banquet at Windsor. Another prominent necklace drawn from the Queen Mother's collection was adjusted specifically to suit its new wearer, a decision that reflects a very practical kind of long-term planning. This is an antique collet necklace composed of 40 old-cut diamonds, presented by King George VI to his wife for the 1937 coronation. While she didn't wear it for the actual ceremony at the Abbey, it became a central part of her image, appearing in her most famous state portraits. When Queen Elizabeth II decided to lend this piece to Camilla for her 60th birthday in 2007, she was making a very deliberate choice. She was providing a piece of regalia specifically created for a queen consort's coronation year. The necklace was noticeably shortened for this new chapter, reduced from 40 diamonds to 31. I find this interesting because it wasn't a minor tweak. It was a practical decision by the Queen as a curator. We saw the result at a 2008 state banquet at Windsor Castle, where the diamonds sat perfectly against the neckline. It is also worth noting a small, intriguing detail about those 9 removed diamonds. Stones of that caliber are never truly lost. they returned to the royal collection for future use. It is fascinating to consider that they may have been reserved for an even more significant moment, perhaps becoming the basis for the massive diamond earrings we saw Camilla wearing on her own coronation day years later. By the time we began seeing Camilla in the grand tiaras and heavy diamond necklaces that had belonged to the Queen Mother, her official position was already very clear. These were not experimental choices. They firmly placed her within the highest level of the royal hierarchy. But there is another layer to this story, one that I find much quieter and perhaps even more revealing. Some jewels in the royal collection are not primarily about status or display. They carry a personal history, moments, and private meanings that are not always visible to the public. To me, when access is granted to those specific pieces, it suggests something that goes beyond rank. It suggests a level of trust. The James Bow brooch belongs to that category. It is a diamond ribbon, centered around a caterfoil, given in 1923 to Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon as a wedding gift from her godmother, Mrs. Arthur James. It remained with her throughout her life, appearing in formal settings and in moments that felt distinctly personal. When Camilla wore this brooch in September 2006 at the memorial service for her father, Bruce Shand, the choice felt particularly weighted. In my view, at this point, Camilla was no longer simply representing the institution. She was being allowed to participate in its memory and use objects tied to the emotional history of the family. A slightly different, more subtle story unfolds with the Fabergé Lily of the Valley brooch. Unlike many of the Queen Mother's jewels, this piece was never strongly associated with her public image. While its origin is well documented, it was presented to her in 1956 by Nikita Khrushchev during his visit to Britain. There are no well-known photographs of her wearing it. In a sense, it existed on the margins of the collection, acknowledged but rarely seen. When Camilla began wearing the brooch, including for the wedding of her daughter, Laura, in 2006, it did not immediately stand out as a major statement piece. It is delicate and restrained, almost understated in comparison to the larger diamonds she was increasingly entrusted with. What I find more telling is what happened afterward. The brooch quietly became part of Camilla's regular rotation. Over time, she returned to it again and again, choosing it for a range of engagements, including those with personal significance. This sharing of intimate family history extends to one of the most romantic pieces in the royal vaults. In October 2012, Camilla attended the premiere of the James Bond film Skyfall in London, wearing a striking amethyst and diamond sautoir. It features a large heart-shaped amethyst pendant suspended from a chain of seed pearls. Before that evening, the piece had been entirely absent from public view for nearly a century. To understand the weight of this necklace, we have to travel back 100 years to the days leading up to the 1923 royal wedding. Queen Alexandra, the bridegroom's grandmother, invited Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon to lunch and presented her with this sautoir. When the wedding gifts were displayed at Buckingham Palace, the necklace sat in a fitted heart-shaped box alongside a handwritten note on Marlborough House stationery. In her distinctive handwriting, the aging queen had written, "For my dear future granddaughter Elizabeth from her after grandmother." The newly minted Duchess of York favored the necklace heavily in the early years of her marriage. She specifically wore it as a mourning jewel when Queen Alexandra passed away in 1925, as purple was an acceptable color for formal royal mourning. After the 1920s, the piece vanished into the royal vaults. When Queen Elizabeth II retrieved this deeply sentimental wedding gift and passed it on to Camilla, she established a seamless historical link. The gesture directly connected Queen Alexandra, the Queen Mother, and the woman who would eventually stand beside King Charles III. For 17 years following the 2005 wedding, the official policy from Clarence House remained clear. When the time came, Camilla was intended to be known as Princess Consort. This was a specific, formal decision made to navigate the complicated public sentiment of the time. The jewelry she was entrusted with, however, suggested a different path. The Delhi Durbar and the Greville honeycomb tiaras were, after all, historically the diadems of queens and empresses. The verbal confirmation of what the royal vaults had been signaling finally arrived in February 2022. On the eve of the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne, Queen Elizabeth II released a message to the public. She wrote, "It is my sincere wish that, when that time comes, Camilla will be known as Queen Consort." the Queen's public statement definitively ended decades of dispute over Camilla's future title, bringing the formal protocol exactly in line with the scale of the diamonds she had already been wearing for years. History has no subjunctive mood. There are no what-if scenarios that we can ever truly test. Sometimes, looking at how difficult and long this path was, I find myself thinking that everything would have been much simpler if Charles and Camilla had just married from the start. But then, I am reminded of a simple reality. If they had, we would not have Prince William and Prince Harry. It is difficult to think of the modern world without them, and in that light, those fantasies of if only suddenly seem quite meaningless. The story happened as it did, and these diamonds were there to document every careful step toward the present. Looking back over this 35-year journey, the trajectory is undeniably complex. Camilla navigated a path from profound public criticism to standing directly beside her husband as King Charles III. Throughout this long transition, the jewels of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, played a quiet, steady role. They provided a visual bridge, allowing Camilla to step into the history of the British monarchy wearing stones specifically suited to her rank. Following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Camilla naturally gained access to the main royal vaults, opening up an entirely new chapter of jewelry choices for her own time as queen. If you found this dive into history and the silent language of royal diamonds as fascinating as I do, please support this video with a like. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so we can continue to explore these treasures and the lives behind them together. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Pour yourself some fresh tea, and I will see you soon in our next story.